Hey guys, how's it going? Eli here, back with another video where today we're going to be having a conversation about my number one most important tip to consider when investing in Pokemon cards. Without further ado, let's just jump right into it. As always, getting out of the way, we do weekly giveaways. All you have to do to enter is be subscribed, leave a like, and comment down below on any of the pre-recorded videos we post each and every week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Of course, as always, you can comment and like on each video so you get multiple entries, and then you also have multiple opportunities to win. As always, today is the day for the winner announcements, so we're going to be showing those. But before we do so, always got to mention it. If you are interested in, of course, purchasing our PokemartUSA mystery packs, we are now finally getting the shipment process officially rolled out. So sorry for the delays. We've been having some for the holidays. Check out our website, PokemartUSA.com. And then if you want to support the channel as well, furthermore, in checking out our local game store's new official website to buy singles products, go to e4cards.com. And lastly as well, we've been becoming extremely active and dropping links down to deals for Pokemon products, especially as we're getting closer to Black Friday. So if you want to go check those deals links out and you want to be a part of an awesome community on how to find great Pokemon card deals, I highly recommend you join our Discord. Down in the description below is where you'll find the link. But now, finally, announcing the winners for today. Let's do a little bit of a drum roll. As always, moving my face out of the way. The three winners are a little bit smaller than usual. I apologize, but it is Pro Gamer, Pokemon Dad Breaks, and then Nesto28. Shout out to you guys. Hopefully this won't overlap, but there we go. A little bit of a bigger font. You want to claim your prizes, all you have to do is join the Discord and then PM me directly, and then of course I will go through the verification process and we will get your specialty packs shipped out soon. But now that we're finally getting into the topic, one of the most important things I really want you guys to consider, and I've talked about this before if you are someone when it comes to you've just been following the channel for a while. And kind of like how I did with last video, I'm just going to tell you the one tip, and if you want to stick around and have me explain it further in detail, then of course that's what you're going to do. If not, I'll just tell you the tip. You need to consider the PSA population spread. I know, if you've been around for a while, you're like, Eli, I already understand that, you've talked about it before. But for those of you who've got a lot of new people to the channel, and for those people that may think they know what I'm talking about, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive today. And this is going to be what I think is extremely important thing to have a conversation about, especially too, because with our Patreon release, which is going to be on Black Friday, we're going to have a lot of data sheets for those people that are going to be a part of that. They're going to be really confused on a lot of the analytics when it comes to breaking it down. And so I want to be able to give some examples on why I think it's really important to take that into consideration, because a lot of the times I feel like people tend to have misguidance when it comes to which Pokemon product to buy, right? You know, everyone always thinks, oh, I should buy this Pokemon because it's been going up for the past year, or, oh, I want to buy this Pokemon because it's a popular character, or, oh, I want to buy this Pokemon because it's from a popular set. Like, although there's a lot of variables when it comes to considering these things, if you're wanting to have safe return on your investments, especially if you're looking to buy raw and then eventually flip and try and get it graded as PSA prices continue to go downwards, this is something that's even more crucial to understand when looking and saying to yourself, all right, how can I make the most worthwhile on my investment? So a couple of things you want to take into consideration. We're going to go over to Pokedata and we're just going to pull some things up. I've talked about this before and we'll talk about it again just because it is the most prime example of what I'm talking about. But let us take a look at Evolving Skies. And as I've mentioned many times before, there is a weird correlation, I should say, in terms of pricing, or a little bit of a disconnect almost is the best thing I should say to that. When we go and we take a look at the overall price spread between the cards, right? As you guys can see here clearly, when comparing the price of the PSA 9 cards to the raw cards, the most recent sale for a PSA 9 was $285. With that, of course, TCG Player being $315 for the most recent raw sale. What am I basically saying by that? If you take that spread into consideration, what do you know? You're going to be losing money if you happen to get a 9. Now, obviously, with current modern day product, it's hard to believe, but the prints are actually much better than they were before. That's why, as we can see with the Rayquaza PSA population report, we know that the 9 has 194 cards, and we know that the 10 has 1,537 cards. Why is this important? Because of 2 reasons. One, it shows us how nowadays, for a lot of this ultra modern product, 9s are almost just irrelevant. There's no point of sending in a card trying to get a 9 because you know that your profitability and value you're going to be getting out of it, it just doesn't make sense, right? And I'll make my face a little bit smaller on the screen just so you guys can kind of see what I'm referencing on the 10, as you guys can see right there for the population. But not to mention too, what you're going to be getting out of it more or less at the end of the day. If your card, for example, is on the verge of a 10 but you don't know and it's a 9, you're just playing a huge risk of saying, all right, I'm going to spend $18 when it comes to shipping out the card, or for the general, of course, fee at the moment, unless they have another special, a couple dollars to insure the package. So roughly you're about $20 invested on this card. Not to mention on top of that too, if you get a 9, you're already going to be losing $30. So if you hit that 9, you're losing $50 in your total investment. Of course, if you don't and you are buying that card for $330 and you're getting it for $380, well, guess what, guys? You're saying to yourself $380, and then you're going to hopefully sell it for its highest point, $510. You have to take fees into consideration when selling. You're roughly looking around $433 minus that by $380, and what do you know? That's your total overall profit you're going to be making, roughly around 10%. Now, if you're someone that likes to get a 10% profit and you like to say to yourself, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to wait and I'm going to take all the time in the world, because it doesn't really matter to me, then sure, you can play that game. But obviously time is money, and I think that's extremely important to consider, especially too when it comes to the price of these cards. We don't know where the PSA 10 population is going to be for Rayquaza in the next year or so, because presumably prices on PSA cards are going to continue to go down as the population continues to grow. It wouldn't make sense otherwise, and that's why I think it's really important to be able to be aware of these things to look at, because the last thing you want to do is go buy a card hoping it's worth your time and money, getting it as a 10, price drops all the way down to another 10% below of what you initially bought the raw card for, and then of course by the time you get it graded, let's say best case scenario you get a 10, and then all of a sudden you end up breaking even, best case scenario, because that's something that's super important. Obviously, raw to PSA 9 is one of the biggest factors and indicators to this, but also looking at the spread between the 9 and the 10 and the 10 and the raw is also really important. You should, in my personal opinion, have at least a double spread typically when it comes to having enough margin, more or less. I'm not gonna, try and wait all this time, and that's a minimum, right? Like, I'm not shooting for double. I'm shooting for triple, quadruple, because if you're saying to yourself, I'm going to potentially take the risk that this Pokemon card, which is an ultra modern Pokemon card, knowing that it's still in high population, knowing that it's still in high print, that I could lose out on all this money, then it's just not a risk that I'm willing to take, right? And this, I think, also is extremely important too for those of you guys that are collectors. Sure, you might, say to yourself, Eli, I don't really care about this because I'm not an investor, I'm a collector. Well, that's totally wrong. You should care about this, because if you are someone that is a collector, you should still care about knowing how market trends work, specifically for graded cards, raw cards. There tends to be, of course, as we see with PSA 10, historically speaking, a correlation in price rejection. Eventually, right? Like, as you've been seeing with the card itself, we know that as it stands, the raw card is just climbing in value, and you're just seeing kind of a more, upward / sideways action, I would say, for the overall value of the 10. If you just see the raw card continue to climb and PSA 10 value doesn't go up, then they get closer and closer to one another. then something's going to have to break. Either you're going to see a reaction of PSA 10 values going up, or you're going to see a reaction in raw prices crashing, or PSA crashing, which then in turn is going to cause raw to crash, because it's just simple supply and demand economics, right? And so you can use this as, trend projectors. For example, if hypothetically the PSA 10 were to continue to go down, but of course, raw card is going to go up, then more than likely, going off of the fact of the matter that we know PSA's population is only going to continue up from there, then the value of the raw is just going to have to find a breaking point where it's going to start to go down. Or why would you ever consider buying raw? It wouldn't make sense, because the demand would all of a sudden disperse. Because if you're saying to yourself, okay, PSA 10 prices have been dropping, hypothetically for the past 6 months to a year, why not spend that extra $50 to get it to a 10? We're not there right now, but for future 10s, it's really important to look at these things when we're trying to make future predictions. So moving on and taking a look at some other cards where you could, of course, make some comparisons within Evolving Skies. This was actually one I want to give a shout out to one of our members in the stream, John Doe. This was one he originally took a look at. We'll, of course, see where it is right now. But he had more or less asked me the question, Eli, what is your own personal opinion when taking a look at the spread? Well, most recently, we can see where it's changed from when we had that discussion at first. But I want to say about a month or two, we had a conversation about this card. You could buy it raw for $28, and then if you got a 9, you were able to sell it for roughly around 60. That's a really good spread when you're talking about raw to PSA 9 value. Then, of course, if you looked at the spread between raw to, of course, PSA 10 value, then you're talking about roughly around a 4 to 5x gain. That's incredible. This is a card that you, of course, want to be able to use those spreads on, because there's such value when looking at examples for these cards, because the margin of error is so much greater for you. If you were to get a 9 instead of a 10, you're not, of course, all hope is lost. And even if you're an expert grader that thinks, I know what a 10 looks like versus 9 looks like, you should know that sometimes graders can be very unforgiving. And then at times too, if you're going to be pulling a card and you are trying to decide whether it's worth sending in for grading or not, you can determine whether or not it's worth taking that risk based on understanding the spreads. And of course, most notably, if we're talking about the spreads, a most recent sale happened roughly about a week ago, where the price absolutely dumped. It might not sound like a dump, but from $60 all the way down to $45. And now you're starting to, of course, see that spread come closer and closer, where the value is not as good if the price continues to go down. We're starting to see this kind of convergence, I would say, now that PSA has opened back up again, where a lot of these card prices, specifically for PSA 9s and 10s, are starting to either, stop going up and going sideways, or going down, because the value for, PSA 9s with PSA 10 populations being so much easier and grading be so much more prevalently available. Why would most people at that point say to themselves, why would I want a 9? What is the advantage for me to get a 9 when the population of them is so much, lower compared to 10s, and 10s are so much easier to get, right? Unless you're saying balling on a budget, I just want to get it in a slab and I want to get it more affordably, because it is cheaper than raw, which is crazy to think for most cards. But, I digress with that, right? So these are just, of course, important things, once again, doubling down, that I want you to be able to be aware of and taking into consideration when trying to decipher, is this a good investment? Is this a bad investment? And I gave 2 examples, of course, for both the good and the bad and how things have shifted. Now let's take a look at an example, and we're going to try and make this video a little bit short, so we're going to try and wrap it up here. But let's go take a look at an example of some cards that are no longer in rotation, because before we were just looking at cards that are in the current Sword and Shield era. And so rotation, of course, is something that, is no longer taken in consideration when you're looking at what's the possibility that there's just going to be a flood of cards on the market if a reprint does happen, right? So the first one we're going to take a look at, and I really like this example because there was a resupply of this not that long ago. So, Lost Thunder packs have become more affordable, relatively speaking, from how much they were not that long ago. But if we want to take a look and see the spread, the value once again has been quite interesting to say the least when you look at the history of time of this. For a while there, the PSA 9 value was of course lower because we saw that correlation happen when the overall reprint happened, or resupply I should call it, about a year and a half ago. And you started to see the price absolutely drop for the raw as well as the graded as the population began to increase for that. But also one other thing you have to take into consideration when looking at the Sun and Moon era, although the card quality was good, in the grand scheme of things, it's not Sword and Shield era good quality. I know a lot of people, don't really recognize that if you haven't been in the hobby long enough, but you can easily see it by the population reports. For example, once again, Lugia GX Secret, PSA 9 versus PSA 10. The overall population for the 9 is slightly lower than the 10, of course, but it is still closer than what we've seen with more modern stuff. Of course, that being a lot of Evolving Skies, PSA 10s being 10 times higher than that of the PSA 9 populations. Now let's take a look at the spread value between the raw and the PSA 10. Of course, with that, you're starting to see it's in that price range I like a lot more. $600 for a PSA 10 compared to $145, $143 for a raw. That's a really good price point, I would say, because even though, the spread most notably for the 9 is a lot closer, because with the recent resupply, of course, prices for this have gone down quite a bit, but this resupply has still yielded a great enough of an opportunity where I feel as if it's worth the risk of going break even on a 9, because with a lot of new pack fresh Lugias being pulled from the build-in battle kits that were found at LGS and distributor warehouses, it's something that I really think you have a potential for making a 4+X return if you, of course, play your cards right when going and shopping on places like TCG Player or on eBay and looking at the highest card quality. One of the things I hear a lot is, since you can't see the images for PSA cards, it's really hard to decipher what is a good condition card because it's labeled as near mint. Well, from personal experience, what I've seen more likely is that when you're looking at Sun and Moon era and Sword and Shield era, that's when you tend to see the most likely possibility of potentially getting 10s graded. Of course, that's not always a guarantee, but from personal experience, there has been quite a few amount of cards in the Sun and Moon era that I have purchased where I've actually been able to acquire 10s after sending them in for grading, but XY and older, I haven't had that same amount of luck. And with sets, once again, that have had resupplies or reprints, then you're just going to have an even higher chance of getting a better possibility knowing that there's fresh opened cards from packs that are going to presumably be in really good condition. Now, finally, we're going to be taking a look at another set. This one is no longer in rotation. There has no longer been a resupply for this. And as far as we know, the only product that you're going to be able to purchase these packs are going to be an older Pokemon product that came out in the Sun and Moon era. That set we're going to be taking a look at is Unified Minds. Now, Unified Minds, for those of you guys that don't know, it had its last reprint in the end of 2020. Of course, roughly around 2 years ago at this point. This is a set that, like the rest of the Sun and Moon era, had a relatively good print outside of Burning Shadows, of course. And so the expectation is, hopefully, if you're going to go off a TCG Player, you have a possibility of getting cards that are more than likely at least going to yield you 9s or 10s. When going and taking a look at the spreads for the PSA 9 compared to TCG, obviously there's only been one real instance in time where you've seen the spread not be worth it to where you're at least breaking even comparatively when looking at grading. But of course, for most of the history of this card, you've usually had a pretty good spread. But as mentioned before, the whole point of the spread is more or less, can I make value off the 9, or can I get enough of a buffer to where if I do hit that 10, the risk of potentially getting a 9 is worth it because I'm breaking even or only losing a couple of bucks. What do you know? Once again, looking at the spread, you can see that the most recent sale was 264 compared to 87. That's roughly around a 3 times gain. And that's something that I think is, of course, an amazing opportunity to be able to have the chance of getting this card graded. You know that it's going to be a card that, based off the history of its value, it's just been more or less going sideways. And so we don't see that there's a possibility, more or less, of that card going down anywhere between another 30 to 40% in a 3 to 4 month period of course, grading, unless some economic disaster were to, of course, occur. These are just things you, of course, must always be ready for, because, you know, I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. Always do your own research, but there's always variables that you have to more or less be able to account for. But of course, at the end of the day, wrapping it up, some of the most important things to consider, or more specifically, the number one most important thing to consider is this. When it comes to knowing which cards are worth picking up raw versus graded or sending in graded, you have to always understand what's the spread between the 9 and the 10 value, what's the spread between the 9 and the raw value, and what's the spread between the 10 and the raw value. Just overall, knowing your spreads, understanding what, of course, the population is during its time, and knowing, is this an item that's in print, out of print, and how is this overall going to play an effect. That's the number one most important thing that a lot of people do not consider whatsoever. I hear all the time, Eli, I think alternate arts are going to do amazing. Eli, I think that with, of course, Evolving Skies being the highest set of all time, I think it's an amazing time to pick it up, because 10 years, you're never going to think about it. But guys, you still have to understand, when looking at the charts, it goes a lot deeper than that, because there's still opportunities in the macro short term for you to pick up even better positions when the time is right long term, when you're starting to see, of course, the demand and the overall amount of people interested in Pokemon grow even larger. But as far as it goes, ladies and gentlemen, that is all for today's video. Thank you guys all so much for watching. As always, please leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe if you want to enter into weekly giveaways. We've got 3 winners each and every week, and 3 opportunities for you to enter by commenting on any of the videos Monday, Wednesday, Friday that we post. Of course, if you want to also support the channel, please check out our website, PokemartUSA.com, and purchase some of our mystery packs that just released. If you want to support our local game store, check out our website, e4cards.com, to pick up any of our singles from our official in-store. And then lastly, if you haven't already, I highly recommend you join the Discord, as we have just recently become extremely active in listing deals in the Discord for you guys to take advantage of if you're just trying to find the best prices anywhere on the internet for Pokemon cards and product. That is all for today's video. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Until then, I will see you all on Wednesday. Peace.